Hi everyone, Sir Paints-A-Lot here. This is the final video in the Ushoran series. For this part of the tutorial, I'll be focusing on adding details to the skin, fur, metals and base. I use Bugman's glow to base all the areas that will be leather. I even mix it with some water so I can glaze over areas of Ushoran's flesh. I wanted to add some areas of interest near where his horns and bones are protruding from. I use scale 75's Necro Gold to paint the bangles and highlight the scepter and other bronze/gold metallic objects. I make sure to paint the areas that would be catching the light, maybe some soft dry brushing on other parts, just to pick some details that may be hard to see. Also from scale 75, Elven Gold. I use this to paint the Stormcast helmet and whatever paint is left on my brush. I use as a soft dry brush, picking out the sharpest edges of the other gold/bronze objects. I use Black Legion for the hair and bits of string. I wanted to use some dark colors to help tone down the model and add some contrast to the pale skin and bright cape. I forgot to show it, but I used Screamer Pink to paint the inside of the mouth. I still had some paint on my brush, so I then added water to it and then kinda used the paint as a wash on the areas I wanted some bruising and inflammation. I used Deepkin Flesh to paint the heads and limbs tangled in the fur. This paint doesn't cover super well unless it's over white, but a good 2 or 3 coats should be fine. I then use Corax White for the gemstone, teeth and the skulls and bone areas. I used Agrax Earthshade over the teeth and again I watered it down and shaded the eye sockets to bring some shadow and contrast to the skin. I shaded the bones, fur and metals. During this step, I could see the model was slowly coming together. Again, Necro Gold was used in a mix of stippling and dry brushing to add a bit more texture and highlights to the previously shaded metals. I paint in his tiny eyes with a bright yellow. Any is fine, make sure it's bright. This will contrast with the shades I just added to the eye sockets. I use Cadian flesh as a highlight for the skin/leather parts. I'm painting vertical strokes so there is a consistent texture. Plaguebearer's flesh is a great paint I use whenever I need to paint green saliva in and around the mouth of my monsters. I haven't used this paint for a while and forgot it can be quite thick, so I added some water to thin it down a bit. I also went over the teeth with a super bright white paint. Any paint will do. I made sure to leave the stains closer to the gums. I glaze and shade the inflamed or bruised areas with Carroburg Crimson. Again, you may experiment with thinning the paint with water. Keep it thick where the bones are closest to the open skin, then thin the paint as you move the brush away from those areas. This will create a nice gradient. I tried using silvernef bark to dry brush over the hair in the middle. I also went over some of the fur cloak. I now go over the main fur cloak with Garak sewer mixed with some water. I felt it was a bit too bright and needed some toning down. Reichland Flesh Shade was added to create some additional tones. And to shade the leather/animal flesh. I use the same paints from before and go over areas that are a little dull due to the shades I had just applied. For example, here I'm using Deepkin Flesh and applying it over the decapitated heads. As I have some paint on my brush, I start to experiment with it to highlight the face and other parts of Ushoran. I feel it's very similar, but I make sure not to use too much, just to sharpen areas. I add Nylox oxide to the crevices of the metallic parts. You may use any bright turquoise paints, but make sure to add lots of water or thinning medium. I base the flame with a bright white paint. Any brand will do. I give it a few coats so it's nice and even. I then paint Uriel yellow and once again give it a few coats. Once it's dry, I add an orange fluorescent paint. I mix in a bit of water to help it flow into the crevices of the flame. I'll do a bit of wet blending now with a red fluorescent paint. I only paint the top part of the flame red, as it's the hottest at the bottom. While the flame is drying, I use rust streaks to start adding some texture and contrast on the base. use Spirit Stone Red for the jewel embedded in his forehead. I'm not sure if these Citadel technical paints are available anymore, or probably renamed. Back to the flame. Flesh Tearers Red is added to the upper part of the flame, and I apply it straight from the pot and aim for the uppermost part of the flame. I then thin it with water to create a gradient into the lighter red paint. For the tips and coldest part of the flame, I add Black Legion paint. This part is mostly wet blending, and I'll go back and forth with Black Legion and Flesh Tearers paint. It can be a bit fiddly, but it just takes a bit of practice, and you'll eventually be able to get a feeling for when the paint is too thin or too thick. I paint the hot coal with Flesh Tearers, and I fill in the brazier to get it ready for the fire OSL effect. I even add some red to the chalice. I glue in the flame and now start to lightly airbrush red fluorescent paint to the area around it. I even change the angle of the model so I can catch the steps, toes and other areas that may catch the light. I use red as the OSL brightness gets less intense the further away we get from the flame. I may have added a bit too much red, especially to the flame itself, so I use Pro Acro Bold Titanium White into the recesses of the flame. It's super thin and flows well enough on its own, but I added a drop of water to help it a little bit more. I also paint the edges of the stone closest to the flame. I also highlight the teeth. Once this was dry, I airbrushed the parts I just painted white with a layer of orange fluorescent. I add a bit of a bright yellow to certain parts where I feel there is a bit too much orange or white. With a brush, I glaze fluorescent paints over areas on the flame that I feel needs more intensity. I also touch up parts of the jewel and corners of areas that are catching the light of the flame. I added a matte varnish. This slightly dulled the metal parts, so I went back over them with paints I had used earlier. I went back to the areas I touched up with fluorescent paint and added a drop of yellow fluorescent paint to these areas. I found some Greenstuff World spider serum and I knew I wanted to use it for this project. I've had this for over a year and was too scared to use it. I faced my fears, poured it into my airbrush, and sprayed it without thinner over areas I wanted to add spiderwebs. I would say it's quite scary to use as it can easily clog the airbrush if not cleaned properly. And finally, Ushoran is complete and ready to sit in my glass cabinet. I do kind of regret adding the spiderwebs to a gaming model. It looks great, but the spiderwebs come off quite easily if I'm not careful, or I put it into a foam case for transport. I hope you like these tutorials. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts or if you have any questions. Happy painting and see you next time.